Welcome to Local is Lekker, where we look for local businesses with a lekker story. One of the highlights of walking around the block here in Kloof, where I live, is that there's a pecan tree behind me, and in winter we sometimes find some pecans on the floor. And it reminds me of visiting my grandmother, where we used to go and pick pecans with her. Today's story is about Pecan Pro Nursery, which was started 30 years ago by my brother Heiko. Heiko is a pioneer in the pecan industry in South Africa, and I'm very excited to bring you this story today.
Yeah, we've just arrived on the farm where my grandparents used to live. These are the original trees that my grandmother planted here more than 65 years ago. Most of them seedlings, but there are some improved varieties. One specifically I remember she told me was a money maker that she bought from H.L. Hall and Son from Nelspruit and planted here on the farm. Yeah, this is the water farrow that my grandmother irrigated the pecans with. Yeah, when they first came here on this farm, my grandfather, he was more of an engineer than a farmer. My grandmother was a farmer. He measured out a water farrow from here more than 4 kilometers long, and actually dug that furrow with hand labor, getting water here to their homestead. And from here my grandmother used to have siphon pipes that she put out of this water farrow, irrigating these big old trees here in the background. Yeah, most of the very old homesteads here have got 1 or 2 pecan trees that the old settlers planted. We grew up with pecans. When I met my wife, she saw pecans for the first time in her life, but we just remember pecans from ever. As kids, we used to come here and pick up especially after a windy day, we would come down here with my grandmother picking up the pecans below the trees, and yeah, like a hen with chickens. Yeah, and some of these trees are so beautiful, big and green. Now in winter they're bare, but harvest time now, hey? I'm Heiko Meier. I've been involved in the pecan industry for more than 30 years. I've got my own orchards. We've planted major orchards in Cradock and in Cradock, close to Upington. Yeah, we've been producing pecan trees for more than 30 years in my nursery in Commondale, and have supplied the whole country. I've supplied from Natal down to the Eastern Cape. We've supplied a lot of trees in Farlouts, Northern Cape, even Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe. So in our nursery, the two things that distinguish us is, one is the raised bed system, and the other is the way we package our trees, because we still package our trees in moist sawdust. Much more bulkier to transport. Your transport cost is higher, but the packaging is definitely superior. Yeah, the idea with the raised bed system is that your whole taproot is actually above the ground level. Most nurseries worldwide actually use a system where they just grow directly in the soil. This system works better for me. We've been in this system for about 30 years. It is much more expensive, but I think we get a better root system because you can mix your soil for the beds the way you want to mix it, and when lifting the trees we damage very few of the roots, whereas in the open beds, digging the trees out with the excavator, you might damage more roots. All the water that you give flows from the top down, and there are no nematodes that can come in from the sides in the soil. And most of the soil that we use here is virgin soil, with some compost and other additives that we add to it. So it gives us a very good growing medium and very nice root development. Yeah, these are trees that have been in the beds for 2 years now, since we planted them. They're ready to graft now. My grafting team is here. Yeah, we cut them off very short, this height, and then we graft them. After that they grow another year, they back bigger than they are now after a year. Then we start digging them at 3 years, and some of them we leave for another year. We sell them at 4 years. Now this is just rootstock. These are ungrafted trees, you can't plant them. And with pecans, to have trees that are true to kind, you need to graft them. The other advantage of having grafted trees is you graft mature wood onto a juvenile rootstock. And mature wood can start producing as soon as the tree is big enough, it starts producing. With a seedling, it still has to mature, which can take between 10 and 15 years before it actually starts producing. Where a grafted trees can produce, some of the varieties as young as 3 or 4 years they start producing already. Now here are some guys busy grafting trees. We use a normal whip graft. It's important to put in a grafting stick that's the same size as your rootstock, to match it as close as you can. 2 graft sticks are pushed together. On the one side you have to make sure that your cambium and your cambium matches properly. And then you wrap the grafting tape around the graft. And then we cover the grafting stick, wrap that as well, to make sure that the grafting stick doesn't dry out. Yeah. The skilled guys that really have done it over the years, they're doing a couple of hundred a day, but it's not as easy as it looks. These trees have been grafted about 3 weeks ago, and the first buds start to shoot now. Within the next month, most of these trees will be growing. I make myself a measuring stick. 4 foot is a bit long. You normally work at about 110 is about the right size for a biggish tree. You cut it off. Some of these trees are as long as 3 meters, 2.5 to 3 meters, and we basically cut them off between 90 centimeters and 1.1 meters. These are cut off at 1.1 meters. So before we start lifting, all the trees are cut off at a standard height. Yeah, you develop a strong arm cutting these trees. Most guys use big loppers. I like my little secateur. See, this one is slightly shorter, so I cut this one off at 3 foot. That's a medium, but the large and extra large trees we cut off at about 1.1 meters. Before we start lifting. This is another medium. It's over a meter. Even this one gets cut off at a meter. The tiny trees I nowadays try not to sell anymore. The best trees to sell are between a medium and an extra large. Cut that one off. That one off. We only leave the grafted trees. They're color coded. This one is color coded yellow for Eucalinga. And then the tree is marked on the stem. You see here, we've got a white mark on the stem at soil level to ensure that the tree can be planted back to the correct depth. If you plant it out, you plant it so that that white mark is level with the soil level. So the guys are watering the beds now, so that we can come in with a big TLB and lift the trees. We're using a front end loader to dig out the beds with the extra big bucket on. It can be quite a mission to make sure that no taproots are damaged. The blade of the TLB cuts them off at about 1 meter, or slightly deeper than 1 meter. It's not a standard bucket, it's a bigger bucket that we've got on the TLB. The trees are pulled out of the loose soil. Yeah, very little damage on the roots. This is the size of trees that we try to produce. Nice strong taproot, about 1 meter long, with some nice side shoots coming out. Here's the mark where the soil level is, and if you transplant the trees, just make sure that you plant them back to that soil level. The tree itself is cut back at about 1.1 or 1.2 meters, and the taproot is between 850 and about 1 meter or 1.10 for the big trees like this. Ideal size to plant. Can get a very high survival rate of the trees. Now these trees are carted to the packing shed. We use a small loader instead of a big trailer. The idea is that every quarter of an hour or 20 minutes there's a fresh load going to the packing shed, and the trees don't remain in the sun for too long. Then all the roots remain moist and you get a nice fresh product. Here the trees come from the nursery and they're sorted by size. We've got small, medium, large and extra large trees. Before the trees are packed, we just put some water on the trees to make sure that they're nice and moist. Any trees with roots that are too short are taken out as rejects. Now this is a nice bundle of large trees. Here the trees are strapped. They're strapped 10 trees in a bundle before we wrap them in moist sawdust. Now we try to have as many of the side roots intact when we pack them, to ensure that there's a high survival rate of the trees. Yeah, we use extra long polyprop bags that I've had made especially for the nursery, 1.2 meters long, that are long enough to wrap the trees in. Now just again some sawdust in the bottom, add some more sawdust on top. We don't save sawdust, and we don't try to make the load lighter. We try to make a bundle that we ensure that all the trees' roots are kept moist and no roots dry out. Tightly wrap them and then we stitch them. The trees are watered again, just to make sure that all the roots remain wet all the time. But it is important to have a nice tight stitch to ensure that there's no loose sawdust inside the bag. Yeah, this is a stockpile of sawdust that we use for packaging material, and a little bit of that I use to make my own compost together with other products that we mix in, but mostly packaging material. All pine sawdust. We leave it in a stockpile for at least a year or two to get it a bit more mature, to have better water holding capacity, and then it's screened. All the coarse material is screened out before we package the trees with it. Now this is a stack of extra large Navajo trees, packed on a 1.8 meter pallet. As you can see, the pallet is actually a bit shorter than the trees, so the trees are 2 meters plus, root about a meter, and the top we cut off at about a meter or meter 20. We've stacked the trees in such a way that we can wrap it now. We wrap the whole pallet with cling wrap to prevent any drying of the roots while we transport the trees. We wrap it a few times, try to overlap a bit. Another round at the bottom, once 40, to make sure that they're properly wrapped at the bottom. Do it twice, and then we just wrap up. Okay. Yeah, it helps a lot to put the trees on pallets. It's much quicker and easier to load if you've got the machinery. For guys to offload at the other side, it works very well. If you've got a big cold room, a lot of the citrus guys or the dairy guys have got cold rooms that are big enough, and they can move the whole pallet as it is into the cold room, and there it can stay for a couple of months if needed. Yeah, we try to always plant the trees as quick as possible and as early as possible. But if your land prep is not right or your irrigation system is not right yet, with these trees you've got the option to actually store them for a couple of months. And if you do need at some stage irrigate the trees again after a couple of weeks, you can just water them from the top, and the water moves through the pallet. There they're busy loading the first trees. It's quite tricky to load them nice and firmly. The pallets are a bit top heavy. They're very, very heavy. Anything between 2 and 2.5 tons for a full pallet. So you need a forklifter that's strong enough to handle that load, and you have to strap them properly if you load to prevent any movement of the pallet. We always try to stack the load as tight as possible. Then you've got less movement and the load is more secure. Every load that we load is pre-counted, so all the pallets, we know exactly how many trees per pallet. especially if it's a long distance split load. We try to have one customer's trees per pallet, not to mix pallets, but they can be quite top heavy. Yeah, over time we've learned how much this machine can handle. I think if you go over 2.8 tons, it actually picks up at the back. You can't. The machine is strong enough, but the weight is not enough to balance out the pallet. Yeah, so it is quite heavy. But some of the guys at our depots, they've got telehandlers, and I've got TLBs that we put on a special fork in the front to offload, so that works well. But the normal 1 or 1.5 ton forklift can't pick up these pallets. I say, nice tight fit. My father actually bought his first pecan trees from Joep Badenhorst Nursery. I planted them. I got very excited. My dad didn't have enough money to keep on buying trees at that stage. He planted a few nuts in the ground in little raised beds, and after 2 years I went to visit Joep Badenhorst. He taught me how to graft, and the first 350 odd trees that came out of my dad's little nursery, I grafted myself, and that's how my nursery started. A year later I expanded the nursery and got in professional guys to help grafting. By the third year we had about 1,000 trees, and my dad first planted his own 7 hectares of orchards. Later on, when my uncle took over this farm, I planted about 50 hectares of pecans on this specific farm for my uncle. All the trees came out of my nursery. Yeah, and that's where it all started. Yeah, and from there it expanded. The nursery got bigger and bigger over the years. When we peaked to close to 100,000 trees a year that we sold. Currently the numbers are down a bit for most nurseries, but the expansion towards the west of South Africa was enormous. And in my life it definitely started with meeting Joep Badenhorst. He introduced me to SAPPA. He was one of the founder members of SAPPA, the South African Pecan Nut Producers Association. He had the vision that South Africa needs to make a pecan trip to the US, to the United States, because our information in South Africa was completely outdated. Yeah, he just came to me and said, Heiko, there's just no other way, you organize a tour. And as a youngster, yeah, thinking back, it was crazy. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have email. We were one of the very few farmers in Commondale that actually had a fax machine. I started sending faxes to numbers that I got in the Pecan South magazine of researchers in America. We corresponded by fax, and I organized a 3-week pecan tour to the US without ever been overseas myself. And on that first trip, originally at our SAPPA AGM, we asked, is there any interest from guys to go on this tour like this? About 20 guys said yes. Eventually we ended up with 4 guys. It was myself, Joep Badenhorst, Albert Bouwmeester and Ben de Klerk. Went on that first American trip. That was in 1997. And yeah, we met wonderful researchers in the States, guys like Bruce Wood, Esteban Herrera. Yeah, it was just wonderful. We went to different nurseries, we went to processing plants, we met guys at Young Pecan Company, the biggest processor at that stage in the US. And yeah, coming back from that trip, we came back with such a load of information for the pecan industry. We had such good contact with American pecan experts at that stage. We just crossed that bridge. And after that, we arranged a pecan short course in South Africa, hosted by Esteban Herrera from New Mexico State University. After that, we had numerous visits by Bruce Wood, Lenny Wells, Jim Woolworth, Richard Jerima, all top pecan experts in the US. And yeah, that's how the pecan industry in South Africa really took off. That's what the starting point was. That's where the momentum came from, and that's where the growth in the whole industry came from. Today, South Africa is the third largest producer in the world after the US and Mexico, and fast growing. I think in another 10 years time, there's a good possibility that South Africa might pass Mexico in production. And yeah, pecan trees, or pecan business, remains one of the most lucrative industries in agriculture today. A lot of the traditional crops along the Orange River, along the Vaal River, Tabazimbi, have been replaced with permanent crops like pecans. The export potential is huge, the profit margins are good, and it's really a good industry to be in. It takes a long time to get your trees to produce. Anything between 4 and 6 years before the trees start producing, and anything between 8 and 12 years before your trees reach full production. So it's a long time. The advantage of the long time it takes before your trees start producing is that the barrier to entry is quite big. So not everybody has got the financial means to get into pecan production, but at the same time it gives a very big advantage for existing growers that you won't get a overproduction easily. The other big advantage with the pecan industry out of the tree nut basket, pecan nuts are just over 4% of the tree nut basket. And that's where we compete in the market. We compete with other tree nuts like macadamias, walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds. Because a pecan nut is such a small percentage of the tree nut basket, the potential to expand is huge. And the areas with ideal pecan climates are very limited. The areas with nice sunny weather, hot climate, and enough irrigation water, those areas are limited throughout the world. You get wet areas with a lot of water, but you don't get many dry areas with sufficient irrigation water. And South Africa, with our big rivers like the Orange River, Vaal River, I think it's the Crocodile River in Tabazimbi, it's got a lot of water, and that ensures that we've got good irrigation areas in hot, dry climates where pecans can thrive. Other thing of pecan production, pecans can handle cold, they can handle frost. Specifically this year we've seen other crops that couldn't make it with the cold. We had a very cold year. Some areas recorded the coldest winter in 25 years. And people have lost a lot of trees, but pecan trees, they have survived. They are made to handle cold. They get dormant in winter, they lose their leaves, and then they can handle temperatures of even -10 is not unheard of in the pecan areas, and they normally don't get any cold damage. It's a very good crop to plant in cold, low-lying areas or our whole western part of South Africa that gets frost. On this specific farm here, the Pongola River is the border of the farm and runs like a horseshoe all around the farm, with deep alluvial soil in that horseshoe, which is ideal for pecan production. Pecan trees need deep, well-drained soil. They need irrigation water. They need sunshine. But if you have that and you've got patience, there are very few crops that can beat a pecan. If you've got a farm with irrigation water in the right climate, which could be anywhere in the western part of South Africa, deep, well-drained soil, join SAPPA. You can contact me for information. I'm the representative for Natal. I've got my own pecan orchards down in Cradock, and up in Upington area, close to Cradock, I've got a pecan nut farm. We know the areas well, we know the varieties, we've got the experience. And I've got a nursery that produces all the different varieties, western and eastern varieties. The quality is excellent. We've got the knowledge to guide you guys to make the right decisions and make the right investment.